You say you feel lost, but let me ask you something deeper. How many times have you quietly walked away from yourself, so silently, so subtly, you barely notice the echo of your own footsteps, because feeling lost isn't something that happens suddenly. It's an erosion, gradual and gentle, like waves shaping stone over countless tides. You didn't disappear overnight. You faded, one quiet compromise at a time. You dimmed your voice to amplify others. You twisted your truth into shapes that wouldn't disturb the fragile peace around you. You smoothed your edges, sanding down your boldness until you no longer recognized yourself, until nothing was left to guard your tender heart. And here's the tragic irony. You didn't do this because you lacked strength or courage. You did it because somewhere, in the silent negotiations of childhood or the quiet agreements of your relationships, you learned a painful lesson. Love must be earned. Safety requires silence. Acceptance demands obedience. You learned that your truth was inconvenient, that your needs were a burden, and every small denial of yourself felt noble, mature, even necessary. It seemed harmless at first, like kindness, but kindness turned into invisibility, and invisibility turned into an aching void. And now, you're exhausted. But this isn't the exhaustion sleep can cure. It's your spirit weary from holding up a mask it never chose, tired from performing in a role you never auditioned for. Because every forced smile when your heart was breaking, every silent nod of agreement when your soul screamed no, every moment you stayed when everything within you begged to leave, that was never kindness. That was abandonment, self-abandonment. Now your days blur into repetition. Conversations feel hollow, your words unspoken and trapped. A strange pain lingers in your bones, an ache you mislabel as burnout, overwhelm, or anxiety. But deep down, you sense the truth. This isn't mere stress or tiredness. This is grief. Grief for every version of yourself you've left behind. You feel lost, not because your path disappeared, but because you silenced the only voice capable of guiding you home. Your own. And now, amid the deafening noise of a world demanding your compliance, your spirit dares to whisper the question you've hidden from. Who am I when I stop being what they need? This question, raw and terrifying as it may be, is also sacred. It marks the beginning of your return, not to a version of yourself they found convenient, but to your real self, the one who remembers what it felt like to breathe freely, to speak honestly, to exist fully. That self has never vanished, never abandoned you. It has only been waiting, patiently, quietly, for you to finally stop dimming and dare to shine again. You never lose yourself suddenly. It happens gradually, one small, polite disappearance at a time. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. The first moment you smile to mask your pain, the first time you nod in agreement when everything inside you cries out in protest. It starts the day you silence your truth, convince someone else's comfort matters more than your own vibrant aliveness. It happens when that whisper within, that gentle voice urging, "This isn't who I am," is met with your deliberate silence, not because you don't care, but because deep down you fear losing the fragile love you've tirelessly earned, and so you say nothing. Again, and again, and again, not because you're weak, but because at some point in your past, you were quietly taught that acceptance demands abandonment, your own abandonment. Initially, it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like maturity, like being noble, strong, the calm anchor in stormy waters. It feels like holding the world together, becoming the reliable one, the quiet keeper of peace, the invisible burden carrier. But beneath every praise, easygoing, kind, strong, lies a cruel misunderstanding. The world loves your mask, not your soul. And over time, the mask becomes so familiar, you start believing the lies embedded in its fabric. Love must be earned through sacrifice. Your truth is dangerous. Your needs are inconvenient. You must hide to belong. So you shrink further. You keep adjusting. You continue abandoning yourself, not maliciously, but habitually, instinctively, out of an ancient fear that revealing who you truly are is the quickest way to be left alone. Yet now, you're tired. not the exhaustion that sleep can heal, but the bone-deep weariness of living a life that isn't genuinely yours. You're tired from nodding when your soul begs you to shout, from being endlessly reliable when all you crave is rest, from being admired for being agreeable when all you deeply long for is to be truly seen. Here's the truth your soul yearns to hear clearly. You aren't lost because life is complicated. You're lost because you continually walk away from yourself. Every time you say yes from guilt, every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, every time you prioritize others' comfort above your own clarity, you vanish a little more. But the path home doesn't demand chaos or upheaval. It begins gently, in stillness. It starts when you dare to pause and bravely ask, what have I been calling love that's merely fear, disguised as politeness? You don't need dramatic gestures or radical changes. You simply need to stop disappearing, because your true self has never abandoned you. It's been waiting patiently, in that quiet sanctuary inside, the very place you once left behind, just to belong. There's a moment, quiet, subtle, yet profoundly unsettling, when someone finally asks you the question you've avoided for years. What do you really want? And suddenly you freeze. Not because you're uncertain or indecisive, but because this question pierces a forgotten part of your soul, a place you've ignored so thoroughly, you barely recognize it now. When you try to answer, you find yourself lost, offering only hollow smiles, vague deflections, and rehearsed nods. Because at some point you stopped trusting your own desires and started echoing what the world expected of you. You learned to want what made you acceptable. You learned to crave what made you easy to love. You learned to value only what made you useful. But now, you're utterly exhausted, not from overworking, but from constantly suppressing who you truly are. Consider Sarah, a woman everyone leaned on. She always showed up, always smiled, always said yes, even as her heart whispered no. Even as her weekends dissolved into endless obligations, even as her laughter grew hollow and her eyes weary. People called her selfless, thoughtful, strong. But what they didn't see, what Sarah herself no longer noticed, was that this strength was slowly draining her spirit. Sarah didn't weep from lack of love. She wept because nobody ever asked what she wanted. And worse, because even if they did, she no longer had an answer. Sarah isn't an exception. She's the rule. She's the woman who never lets herself rest. He's the man who silences his truth to maintain harmony. They're the friend who listens intently, but never reveals their own heart. It's the partner who bends endlessly until they've reshaped themselves entirely into someone else's needs. We've tragically mistaken kindness for erasure, peace for suppression, and goodness for self-abandonment. Here's the profound truth, the spiritual paradox few dare to acknowledge. Every time you betray your authentic self to gain acceptance, you don't just disconnect from others. You disconnect from life itself, because life doesn't meet us through masks. It reaches us through authenticity, vulnerability, and unfiltered honesty. If the world never sees you without the performance, even the love you receive will feel hollow, because it's given to the persona, not to your true essence. So when you glance in the mirror and notice that strange, distant unfamiliarity, eyes glazed with resignation, smiles shaped by habit, recognize this moment not as defeat, but as an awakening. It's a sacred whisper, a gentle fracture in the illusion you've maintained for far too long. Yes, the world has rewarded your invisibility, but your soul grieves every piece of yourself you've abandoned along the way. And here's the magic hidden within the ache. The moment you dare to pause to reclaim your voice, to speak even a fragment of your truth, that is the exact instant everything changes. Know this deeply. You are never too far gone. You are never too late to return. You never need permission to reclaim who you truly are, because coming home isn't a place you find. It's a choice you make, right here, right now, looking courageously into the mirror and finally recognizing the person staring back at you. There's a profound reason so many people feel lost. It's not that they lack direction, but that they've spent far too long walking paths that were never theirs to begin with. You faithfully followed the map handed to you. You embraced the job they approved of, stayed in relationships that drained you, shaped yourself into someone easy to accept. You endured discomfort with a smile, silenced your instincts with politeness, and ignored the quiet ache whispering, "This isn't meant for you." You didn't do this because you're weak or naive or reckless, but because you wanted desperately to belong. Deep within, you hoped, perhaps quietly and unconsciously, that if you kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept becoming what they wanted, eventually someone would pause long enough to ask what you truly needed. But here is the difficult truth. No one else can restore the parts of yourself you've surrendered to survive. That is your journey, your healing, your sacred responsibility. This realization arrives gently for some, like a quiet dawning, and violently for others, like lightning cracking open a stormy sky. However it comes, there's always a moment when pretending becomes impossible, when the masks you've worn feel suffocatingly heavy, when the roles you've played choke out your authenticity. Even the compliments begin to sting, because they celebrate not your truth, but the persona you've carefully crafted to be digestible. And then, inevitably, something cracks. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. You start remembering, not who you were told to be, but who you were before the world shaped you. You recall the fearless child who spoke boldly, the soul that felt profoundly, the innate presence that required no permission, no justification, it simply was. Perhaps returning to yourself isn't about discovering something new, but rather about shedding the layers you were never meant to carry. The heavy expectations, the endless noise, the suffocating guilt, the relentless pressure to be agreeable, quiet, helpful, invisible. As you begin reclaiming your authentic self, the vibrant, raw soul beneath the performance, everything starts shifting. You learn to say no clearly, without fear. You learn to say yes joyfully, without guilt. Your breaths become deeper, your laughter more genuine, your speech deliberate, your steps lighter, and most profoundly, you start recognizing yourself, not as a product of survival, but as an embodiment of truth and authenticity. Maybe then, the real question isn't, how do I stop feeling lost? Perhaps a deeper question is, what would your life become if you stopped abandoning yourself, even for just one day? What would unfold if, even briefly, you chose authenticity over approval? Are you courageous enough to explore that truth? Because you are never too far gone. You are never too late to reclaim yourself. And you never need anyone else's permission to return to who you genuinely are. In the end, the most transformative journey is not one of becoming someone new. It's about coming home to yourself. It's about stepping out of the shadows, reclaiming your voice, honoring your soul, and boldly choosing truth over comfort. This is your moment. This is your awakening. This is your invitation to finally return home.